Okay, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, or good evening, depending on where in the world you are, and a very warm welcome to our sixth webinar in our post-2020 series, where we will be giving an update on the local and subnational roadmap towards COP15 in 2020. My name is Timothy Blatch, and I am in the ICLEI Africa office in the city's Biodiversity Center, working on biodiversity and nature-based solutions, and I will be moderating this webinar this afternoon. On today's agenda, we have a general update on the past few weeks, including a bit of feedback from the UN Climate Summit, and that will be given by Ingrid Coetzee, the Senior Manager of Biodiversity and Nature-Based Solutions here at ICLEI's Cities Biodiversity Center, followed by a pre-recording of Oliver Hillel from the SCBD, providing an update from the point of view of the CBD and expressing a few ways in the coming months where local and subnational governments can be involved in the CBD processes. Then after that, we had Renata Gomez join us in this morning's webinar, and unfortunately she can't join us this afternoon, but we have a pre-recording of her as well, and she will be providing an update on the Advisory Committee on Subnational Governments and how that aligns to the local government process that ICLEI is running. And finally, we're very excited to have Vanessa with us today. And she is going to be bringing in a bit of the voice of the youth, and she, under the auspices of our Urban Natural Assets or UNA project, is going to be sharing some feedback from an exciting event that we held in Malawi, which was a national local dialogue on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, the first in this series, with a few more to come. And finally, we will open the floor for some questions and discussion once all four presentations have been given, at which point there are two ways that you can ask questions, both in the panel on the right. The first is to raise your hand and we will give you the floor. The second is to type a question in the questions box. And I should probably just mention now that this webinar will be recorded, and the recording, as well as any resources that are mentioned during the call, will be made available to all those who have registered. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ingrid Coetzee, and over to you, Ingrid. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Tim, and welcome to everybody who's joined us on this webinar. So I'm going to just focus on a few milestone events from the past few weeks. I'm not going to focus just specifically on biodiversity, because quite a lot of the really exciting things that have happened in the past few weeks has been in the climate space. And just to locate ourselves in terms of our webinar series program, we're nearing the end of the year. This is our sixth webinar already, and you can see there that it coincided with two other major events, the one being the UN Climate Action Summit, which has been taking place this week in New York, and the other one is a Ramsar meeting, which is taking place currently in Korea, and I will talk about both of those events shortly. So one of the first things I want to mention is the very exciting news that our ICLEI Secretary General, the Lord Mayor Ashok Sriran of Bonn, announced a couple of weeks ago on the 21st of August, when he announced that Mayor Valérie Plante from the City of Montreal is taking up the role of the ICLEI's Global Ambassador for Local Biodiversity. And in this capacity, Mayor Plante will shine the spotlight on the role of cities, specifically with regards to nature, as we move forward towards COP15 in Kunming, China next year, and show how cities and metropolitan areas and other types of local governments and subnationals can address the biodiversity extinction facing the world at the moment. And in her acceptance of this role, Mayor Plante has identified a couple of very important things. The one is the need for urgent action. Secondly is the point that we recognize that nature underpins our very existence and the livelihoods that we depend upon and the economies that make our cities and the metropolitan areas thrive. And also, very importantly, she called on mayors around the world to join her in taking up the challenge and ignite a global wave of actions coming from cities and towns, etc., to plan, conserve, and restore nature. And in response to her challenge, several big cities have already supported this call. I'm not going to mention all, I just want to highlight a few of the big ones. This includes London, Paris, and Cape Town. And we've also had several more cities sign up to Cities with Nature. And as we've reported previously, Cities with Nature is the online global platform that is a partnership between ICLEI, IUCN, and the TNC, which is recognized by the Secretariat on the Convention of Biological Diversity as being the official platform for local and subnational governments to share and to report on their commitments towards the new global biodiversity framework and following the conclusion of COP15 next year. Mayor Plant has also made the point that local governments can lead the biodiversity movement, and she has, for example, given what she's done in her own city with the announcement of the largest urban protected area or urban park in Montreal. And she's also made the point that through collective action at the local level, this is one of our best chances in making sure that there is change at the global scale. And the last thing that she said, or one of the other things that she said, is that it's important that local and subnational communities make their voices heard in the consultations and negotiations leading up to Kunming, the COP in Kunming next year. So that, I think, is a very important event and announcement, and we are certainly very happy with the leadership that Mayor Plant has shown and taken so far. Another thing that's very recent and also very exciting has been the UN Climate Action Summit, which has taken place this week in New York. And important about that for the local and subnational government constituency is to note that there was quite a lot of focus on cities, subnational governments, nature-based solutions in the summit. For example, there was an opportunity for parties and representatives from corporates to make announcements on how they would scale up their efforts, particularly around using nature-based solutions. For example, in the nationally determined conditions, the NDCs, contributions, the NDCs. But also, I think within the context of the CBD Convention, it's important also to recognize and just to mention that COP Decision 14.5 made note of the need for closer linkages between the Climate Convention and the CBD Convention, and asked the Executive Secretary of the CBD to, in consultation with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, to review scientific and technical information around the impacts of climate change on biodiversity, and specifically on communities whose livelihoods depend on ecosystem services, and also to look at the role of ecosystems and their integrity for climate change adaptation, as well as mitigation, disaster risk reduction, ecosystem restoration, and sustainable land management. So the discussions being held this past week at the Climate Action Summit are very pertinent and very important, not only within the climate space, but certainly also within the biodiversity agenda. The other thing about the Climate Summit, which is really big news, is that there was a session specifically just on cities, which was held on the 21st. And this included a focus session on nature-based solutions. That was comprised of a moderated panel where representatives from national governments, local leaders, international experts, civil society representatives, etc., responded to specific questions and made representations. And ICLEI was very privileged to be able to secure a place for our Secretary General, Jennifer Begin, to make representations on behalf of our constituency. At that session, there were also the mayors of Tirana and Manaus who spoke, And there were a couple of other things coming out from that particular session. And just to give you a highlight of some of the messages that ICLEI Secretary General emphasized, firstly was the point about how important it is to renew commitments on delivering against our sustainability goals. And he focused on the need to do this at a multilateral level, as well as through collaborative and holistic efforts. He also made the point that while we face the biggest challenges of our lifetime now, it certainly is also an opportunity to really create a nexus between climate, land, and nature, and that this needs to be done in the spirit of collaboration. Our Secretary General also spoke about Cities with Nature as the platform for cities and local governments to report to their commitments. And he made a very important announcement about a new initiative that has been launched by ICLEI and the city of Bonn, which is called Urban for Life. This is a 10-year initiative, and it's a very exciting one because it's focused on 3 main areas, and it shows this nexus idea that he spoke about. Firstly, it addresses the current climate emergency. At the same time, it also talks to advancing livelihoods in harmony with nature. And thirdly, around ensuring the convergence of all of the sustainability agendas through integrated and multi-level collaboration. So these are all very exciting initiatives, and we look forward to hearing more and seeing the implementation of Urban for Life initiative. I think then also what is important is that in her presentation, Mayor Plant also delivered a statement at the summit where she referred to the fact that cities are at the front lines of the climate crisis. And in her comments about knowing what to do and that cities are already taking action, she included one of these being the point of increasing green spaces in cities. And I think it's important that all of the cities globally recognize the great contribution and value they can bring to the table by addressing green urban spaces, bringing in green infrastructure, nature-based solutions, etc. Another important announcement that was made at the Climate Summit was the launch of the initiative called Trees in Cities Challenge, which was announced by the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. And they called on mayors to make tree planting pledges. And the first mayors to take up this challenge have been from Albania, the mayor of Tirana, the mayor of Victoria in Canada, the mayor of Bonn in Germany, and the mayor of Helsingborg in Sweden. And we look forward to having a whole lot more cities join this challenge. Another event that took place a few days earlier in September was at the UNCCD convention COP number 14, which was held in New Delhi in India. And there was a day, a local and regional government day at that COP, which gathered a very impressive array of local and regional leaders from around the world, including mayors and deputy mayors and governors and senior officials. And they obviously talked about the importance of land and natural assets in addressing issues around desertification. And out of the COP, the UNCCD COP, came a declaration which is known as the Delhi Declaration. This contains a preamble that is particularly focused on local governments and land and nature. And I'm not going to read it, it is on the screen, but the important part of this declaration is just to note that in the preamble of the Delhi Declaration, it encourages local governments to adopt integrated land use management approaches, to enhance land governance in rehabilitating the natural resource base that makes our cities sustainable, to take into consideration the new urban agenda, amongst others by reducing the rates of land consumption and soil sealing, along with reducing biodiversity and ecosystem loss. So here is yet another convention that is addressing the issue not just of the contribution of cities, but recognizing the important value of biodiversity in achieving objectives of combating desertification. And the last event that I'd like to just talk about is one that is actually happening at the moment. A few years ago, under the Ramsar Convention, they introduced a program called Wetland Cities, and they're having their first meeting this week in Soncheon City in the Republic of Korea. And the meeting essentially comprises of a political level meeting, which gathered together the mayors of the 18 cities coming from 7 different countries across the world that have already been officially recognized as wetland cities under the convention. And the second part of the meeting is a more technical meeting, which comprises of representatives from those various governments and the Ramsar Secretariat and international network organizations such as ICLEI. And the idea of that technical meeting is to review the roles of the technical group as well as the Secretariat, to review the accreditation process and the evaluation process to date, and to come up with some practical considerations and recommendations on how to enhance accreditation and widen the net of having a network of wetland cities across the world. And with those few words, Tim, I will say thank you very much to everybody, and I look forward to the rest of the presentations in our webinar today.
Great, thank you so much, Ingrid. It's always such a pleasure to have you with us. And I think without further ado, as I mentioned, Oliver from the SCBD was unable to join us in person, but we have a pre-recording of his on an update from the CBD. So without further ado, I will begin the recording.
Good morning or good evening to all our participants. This is Oliver Hillel calling from the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity in Montreal. And I'm very glad to contribute to the 6th webinar that is being organized by ICLEI to discuss the opportunities for local and subnational governments in the process towards the post-2020 global biodiversity framework of the Convention on Biological Diversity. What I'd like to share with you today are a few updates on some processes in the CBD, and also kind of give some suggestions in terms of how local and subnational governments can contribute to this process, and also how they can benefit from the engagement in this process. So the first update is just to say that the last week we had here in Montreal a meeting of the co-chairs of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework with our colleagues in the Secretariat. And while the contribution of local and subnational governments, as you know, through the participation of ICLEI and Quebec and Regions 4 in the meeting of the open-ended working group in Nairobi, the first meeting at the end of August. That meeting really drove home the importance of local and subnational governments in the post-2020 framework. But the problem is that parties and the co-chairs are still struggling to come up with a format for what this framework would exactly look like. What are the apex targets? What is the vision? There's a lot of discussion on the elements, but there is also a difficulty to go ahead. So the first thing I wanted to say is this is the moment for local and subnational governments to position themselves more strongly. And of course, I want to reinforce the importance of ICLEI's Cities with Nature initiative as a commitment to, because the point is this, parties and our partners are being asked to make concrete commitments from here until COP15 to the so-called Sharm to Kunming action agenda on nature and people, for nature and people. So what I'm saying is basically I invite, with ICLEI and its partners, I invite everyone to, in the community of local and subnational governments, to make more concrete proposals towards that framework. We need to gather political momentum. We need to show cards. We need to tell parties, look, this is what we can do. But in order to do that for biodiversity, to help you reach the objectives of the convention, we need you to play these and these and these roles. And of course, in this webinar, there will be also some update on ICLEI's 10-point proposal, which contains already some of those rallying points. But basically, we need to see cities and local governments and subnational governments take more position in that. And again, the Cities with Nature platform is the way to go. So please be encouraged to start concretizing what you would like to see, because it may not come by itself from the CBD parties. And also in that sense, it's also important to note that as a recent progress, the government of China has chosen the theme for the 15th conference of the parties. So we, the secretariat was in Beijing and Kunming, met with the government of China, particularly the Ministry of Environment and Ecology, and that the COP15 organizing committee has been set up. It's made up of about 80 Chinese organizations, and it coordinates with the secretariat. And the theme for COP15 has been defined as ecological civilization, as a way to propose living in harmony with nature. Now, I want to recall that living in harmony with nature is the 2050 vision of the Convention on Biological Diversity. So I cannot underemphasize or overemphasize actually how important this theme is for local and subnational governments. Because you see in COP13, the parties decided to look at mainstreaming and chose the sectors that most directly impact biodiversity. All the while, of course, already in Cancun, we had a very strong presence of subnational and local governments. And so this was a good combination. Then in COP14 in Egypt, we looked at the indirect sectors that cause an impact on biodiversity. And again, we had a very strong and clear acknowledgement of the role of some subnational and local governments. So now the theme of COP15, which is ecological civilization, I really encourage all of you to look at what that means without any prejudice or bias. What it basically means is integrating those sectors and all the vertical mainstreaming and horizontal mainstreaming in a whole of government approach towards a kind of a civilization that has nature as its core. So as a rallying theme, it's very important. And I do not need to remind you that China is a country that is urbanizing at a tremendous rate, and it is one of the countries in which the nexus point of sustainable cities that has been evidenced in the IPBS report is drawn also to them. They understand that cities and subnational governments will play a tremendous role in the post-2020 framework, and that theme definitely opens a lot of doors for this. Another symptom of that is that both the governor and the government of Yunnan province in China, as well as the mayor and the city of Kunming, who are the hosts of the 15th conference, are very much involved in the organization and have expressed their wish to see a very strong summit that is co-organized with ICLEI, parallel to the conference. So again, this is all to say that the theme of COP15 is very attractive to the constituency of local and subnational governments. And of course, we in the Secretariat are ready to help through ICLEI and Regions 4 and the EU Committee of Regions and other networks and associations to make sure that their contribution to the vision of an ecological civilization where urban sustainable consumption and production is one of the main tools to manage landscapes all across the globe, that this is part of what they understand under that. And my last points to share is about some relevant meetings that will be happening over the next couple of months, and to which I'd like you to pay attention. And also this could be a great way for each of you to reach out to your national governments to also make sure that they understand the importance of your contribution. Basically, in the Convention on Biological Diversity, because of the plan of action that was adopted in 2010 and that we want to re-engage for the post-2020 framework, parties and cities and subnational governments are one government. So this is the message that we want to send, and we'd like to invite you to contact your national governments to share those ideas for the meetings that will come up. What are those meetings? Maybe the first one I will refer to is the meeting in Singapore of the Singapore Index on Cities Biodiversity will happen in October 14-17. It's not a big meeting, it's the technical advisory group for that Singapore Index. But what it does is it will offer us a basis for the metrics for local action, for city action. So the Singapore Index is a composite of 23 indicators that is aimed at helping cities self-assess their performance and their status and trends on biodiversity at the service of development and health and their citizens' interests. So the Singapore Index, which is quite well defined scientifically and has been tested by over 100 cities, will be improved, it will be flexibilized, we will discuss it, and please stay tuned. And if I may say so, please look into the Singapore Index as a way for cities to take the metrics, the management, you know, just reminding Galileo said that whatever cannot, measure everything you can, whatever you can't measure, make measurable. And that's what the Singapore Index is attempting to do. The second meeting I wanted to call attention to is supposed to happen in February of next year, and that will be a meeting of subnational and local governments in Brazil, and of course there will be an international aspect to that. So, but it will look at how we can rally the positioning of cities and local governments in one specific case in Brazil. But there will be we're discussing elements of cooperation with other cities, and for instance, one interesting aspect of that is that there's a community of Lusophone-speaking countries, or Portuguese-speaking countries, so there could be ways for this to be extended to include an international aspect. But basically the lesson of that meeting is that it will be very interesting to have that kind of positioning. So basically the positioning of this meeting will be that Brazilian cities and subnational governments will be helping their national government in submitting a position that clearly explicits the contribution of that level of government. And the last meeting I wanted to call attention to, which is at the moment not yet completely defined in terms of its timing, there's been some discussion about April of 2020, is a meeting that it will be hosted by the government of Scotland, has been shared at the open-ended working group in Nairobi by the United Kingdom. And at this moment, Scotland acts as a subnational government of the United Kingdom in the convention. So Scotland wants this meeting to focus on land and seascape management at the level of productive and protection landscapes, which is an issue of subnational governments. So they will work with the EU Committee of the Regions, with Regions 4 and with ICLEI has been announced in the meeting in Nairobi as a contribution of subnational governments to the post-2020 framework. So those are the basic ideas I wanted to share with you, and I'm very sorry I could not be with you in person, but through ICLEI, I'm very open to responding to any of your questions, and my ICLEI colleagues can also give you and share with you my email if you'd like to have any complimentary comment to this discussion. So thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to hearing more, and I wish you a good rest of the seminar.
Great, thank you to Oliver. It's always great to have his inputs and to see where the CBD processes are, and to get an idea of how the local and subnational constituency can be involved. So a huge thank you to Oliver for making the time to do a pre-recording. And we will certainly share Oliver's details as well as some references and resources that have been mentioned. And I think for the most part, we will direct you to the post-2020 engagement platform, and the link will be in the follow-up email where a lot of these resources sit. So next up, we have Renata Gomez, and she is the Policy Officer at Regions for Sustainable Development, which was previously NRG for SD. And Renata is a friend of ICLEI's and Regions 4, a partner. So Renata, she's not able to be with us in person, but we were able to record her presentation from this morning, which we will be playing now. So thank you, a huge thank you to her for participating. And she's going to be providing an update from the Advisory Committee on Subnational Governments. So thank you, Renata.
Thank you very much, team, and welcome everyone to this conversation. Like Tim just said, I will be delivering some updates on the Advisory Committee as well as, and if you move to the next slide, I have a little, yes, as well as I will share the contributions that the Advisory Committee has made to the CBD process on the creation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And finally, I will share some of the spaces in which we are collaborating with other subnational networks and with our local partners. So I would like to start by recalling our conclusions from the first open-ended working group meeting. As Oliver Hillel very well said, there was a general expression of support for having the post-2020 framework be developed and implemented, of course, in a participative and inclusive manner, of course, including subnational and local authorities, which is very, very positive. As Oliver said, we are in the verge of a moment in which we have received the recognition of the on-the-ground action that we are doing. And it has to be better recognized, encouraged, and supported, of course, but the propositions and the proposals of how this collaboration should look like should come from us, from regional governments, from local governments and cities, and I believe that from the Advisory Committee's point of view, this is exactly what we're doing. So firstly, we proposed to renew, expand, or update the plan of action on subnational governments, cities and other local authorities for biodiversity that was endorsed at COP10 many years ago, and that will see its ending in 2020. So this is rather an urgent matter for us as a constituency. We believe that, of course, like we have mentioned in the past, we have proposed to the CBD and the parties to the convention that the structure of the new biodiversity framework should include, of course, the role and contribution of subnational governments as key in the implementation of any biodiversity convention or goal or target. We also believe that as negotiations progress and the structure of the framework starts to take shape, I believe subnational leaders can expect to be better included. However, like I said at the beginning, we should start pushing our message forward. And what comes straight after this slide is also the way we have been pushing this message forward. So straight after the open-ended working group meeting, the Advisory Committee gathered to respond to CBD notification 2019/075, which was the one that invited stakeholders to send proposals on the structure of the global framework. So we did that, and we basically sent these four messages in this particular contribution that we did. One being that the Advisory Committee believes that the processes for developing and implementing the new global biodiversity framework must be well understood and clear to all stakeholders. And by this, we mean that it should not only generate support from the parties to the convention, but also from all stakeholders, including, of course, subnational and local governments. So this notion of support by all includes, like I said, every level of government. We believe this to be essential to effectively implementing this framework in the future. We not only need to be involved in the development, but we need to not just be consulted, but we need to actively be involved and actively support what's going to come in the post-2020 era. Secondly, we emphasize that the structure should also include the role and contribution of subnational governments, and especially what we do on the ground and in relation to the usefulness of subnational governments as the link between national and local governments. And this, of course, speaks to having a clear consideration of the importance of vertical mainstreaming and cooperation with subnational governments and every level of government. Finally, we submitted the message and the recommendation of the Advisory Committee on Subnational Governments to gain official status in negotiations under the CBD. We believe that to be heard, we need to not only go through subnational governments and not only go through our national focal points, but gain some level of authority or status within these negotiations. We want to be further recognized, not just by being consulted, but perhaps by also being considered somehow in the votes and in the process that is to come and to be developed after the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. So this is the very general message we have been sharing. Like I've mentioned in my previous interventions in this webinar series, we have been responding to every CBD consultation because we want to reiterate the importance and the role of national governments like ICLE and our other leading networks of national and local governments. We have been using every platform possible to submit our comment, and in the next slide I will tell you a little bit more of what we have been doing in the for example, to align our efforts with what's happening in the world, particularly. And before I go into the European Week of the Regions, I want to mention, since Ingrid also mentioned, that the UN High-Level Week and the Climate Action Summit that took place only a few days ago provided also a very important platform for regional governments to announce commitments and actions for a sustainable future. In particular, like the governments of COSAS in Senegal and Campeche in Mexico joined the World Health Organization's initiative for air quality and health, and they pledge to achieve safe air quality in their territories by 2030. Additionally, the region of Catalonia is also among the 10 regions that supported the Climate Ambition Alliance to upscale action by 2020 and achieve net zero CO2 emissions by 2050. Also, and this is to finalize our comments on the Climate Action Summit, Mr. Benoit Charette, the Minister of Environment of Quebec, announced Quebec's contribution of $3 million Canadian dollars to the UNFCCC Adaptation Fund to boost climate action on the ground. So these are very important commitments that are coming from national governments that are very strongly related, of course, to climate adaptation, but also to sustainable development and, of course, to biodiversity in the long run. And now I would like to comment that together with the European Commission of Regions, we have been we are taking a big role on the European Week of the Regions and Cities that is taking place in Brussels from the 7th till the 10th of October. Particularly, we are on the field biodiversity. We are chairing a session that is titled "The Future of Biodiversity in the Hands of European Cities and Regions," in which actually Oliver Hiller is also taking part. This is going to be very interesting and also key for us as regions. It's again a platform in which we can showcase and discuss the regions and cities' contribution to the formulation and implementation of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. We see that the potential for biodiversity action is not yet fully utilized at present, although it's of course increasingly being recognized. So we believe that this ongoing preparatory process should represent a major opportunity for local and regional authorities to help shape the future of biodiversity targets and of course contribute to its delivery on the ground once it's adopted. Also, this platform works as a platform to have our efforts formally recognized by, in this case, the European Union, but also the CBD, since Oliver Hiller is also going to be taking part. Additionally, at the European Week, we are also participating and co-organizing a session titled European Regions in the 2030 Agenda Towards a Community of Practice. In this case, this is a workshop that will showcase good practices and common challenges of EU regions that are also members of Regions 4. And this will serve to set a framework for collaboration of these regions, of these subnational governments and other stakeholders to create a community of practice of European regions, like I said, also members of Regions 4, who want to enhance coordination towards political strategies and programs, of course, in relation to sustainable development, but as well as biodiversity and other climate actions on the ground. Additionally to the European Week, we are hoping to be hosts of a side event at Substas 23, together, of course, with ICLEI, with our partners of the Group of Leading International Governments to the Aichi targets, goals, the Committee of Regions, as well as other partners. So we hope to once this is announced and closed, we are going to be publicizing this event, and we hope to see you there. We are hoping to build and strengthen our collaboration with the parties to the convention, and of course to continue to build momentum for subnational governments and cities towards COP15, of course. And finally, we are building together with ICLEI and other partners a very strong unified message that is coming from our constituencies, and that ICLEI prepared the first big draft, is the 10-point framework document, and that we are building upon and creating together as a way of showing like I said, a unified message coming from all our constituencies. And just to close, I would like to thank you all for your interest. I will encourage every one of you to keep these events and these opportunities in your calendars. Of course, send us a message or send us your comments in the next slide. The final slide, you can see my email. Please, like I have been saying in the previous editions, we are open to hear from subnational leading regions. If you want to take part, just follow us on our Twitter and visit our website. We will be eager and happy to share more information with you. Thank you, team and Ingrid, for the opportunity of being here, and back to you.
So thank you so much to Renata. It's great to have been able to include her in this afternoon's webinar. And now we turn to a very exciting participant. Vanessa works here at ICLEI Africa in the Climate Change, Energy and Resilience work stream. and she is part of the team working on a project called Urban Natural Assets, or UNA. And under the auspices of that project, Vanessa accompanied the project team to Malawi recently, where the first of what we're hoping will be a series of national local dialogues were held. So Vanessa is going to share with us some feedback from there, and we're very excited to have her and the voice of the youth represented in our webinar series. So Vanessa, welcome. It's great to have you, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Tim. As Tim mentioned when he introduced me, the UNA team engaged in a national and local dialogue last week in Malawi. And this dialogue was assembled by the Environmental Affairs Department as well as the Lilongwe City Council, with the aim to actively engage and contribute to the process of developing a strong post-2020 global biodiversity framework. So basically in this dialogue, 4 questions were asked to get an understanding of the status of Malawi regarding the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And so I will take you through these outcomes of the dialogue based on the 4 questions. The first question asked was, where is Malawi now? And some of the comments received from those who were in the room were that there is a lot of intent, but no real action. It was indicated that it's only a small group that is pushing forward this agenda, but that lacks real actions. This small group basically does not have any sort of support. They also mentioned that the budget that is available for biodiversity-related work is very little, and it is not ring-fenced. And this is the government spheres, local and national government. So what they meant by this is the budget that is initially set for biodiversity work is often taken and used for other issues in the country. So the country is therefore reliant on external funding to undertake biodiversity protection activities. And another point made in terms of where the country is now was biodiversity management and loss is not yet part of the general idea. In Malawi, biodiversity is not yet considered as much of a problem as it should be. They basically do not see it as a priority, unlike HIV and AIDS as well as malaria issues. And decisions are really made about biodiversity in the country. So moving forward to the second question, where they asked, where does Malawi want to be? Those who were in the room indicated that they would like for central government to release a statement where all stakeholders in the country are sensitized to biodiversity issues, the same way malaria and HIV are being campaigned in the country. Malawi wants to see full participation by the community, and they want to see improved collaboration between cities within the region as well as outside the region. And lastly, they would like to see the inclusion of biodiversity in the education curriculum, starting from primary school level. Asking how will Malawi get there, many commented on the establishment of educational programs, ensuring stronger enforcement, which is linked to capacity building and improved motivation. They want people to take ownership when it comes to the subject of biodiversity. The other point made was on biodiversity statistics to assist with refocusing. More emphasis on how they can take the information forward to mainstream it with other strategies. Also, they will get there by influencing political will, as Oliver called it, political momentum. They believe that politicians are the most influential people in the country. Now, the last question that was asked was, what are the needs and expectations that should be considered by the CBD as well as the supporting partners? Officials from Malawi, they requested that the CBD and the supporting partners need to support programs that sensitize top-level politicians with the aim to encourage political buy-in when it comes to biodiversity. They asked that the CBD and supporting partners should provide the space where cities can come together to critique the post-2020 targets that are being proposed. They also request that the targets and the commitments must be framed into an easy to understand language with an emphasis on how to achieve these targets and commitments. They basically need to be made as easy as possible for politicians to be able to embrace and implement them. And lastly, they request that the CBD and the supporting partners should ensure that these targets bring benefits to today. What they mean by this is the targets currently do not reach the current generation. They are mainly focused on the future. As such, support is needed to bring the benefits closer to home so that people can value the protection of biodiversity today. Thank you very much. If you would like to know more about these outcomes, they are available on the UNA website as well as the local and subnational government engagement platform website. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much to Vanessa for joining us and for giving us feedback on this important dialogue. And as I mentioned before, we plan to have many other dialogues like this one in our project cities and their respective countries. So thanks for being with us, Vanessa. So at this point, all four of the presentations are done, and I just want to wrap up by thanking all of the presenters for their time and their presentations and putting together their slides. And I'm going to open the floor to any questions or points of discussion at this point. And as I mentioned before, there's two ways you can do this, either by raising your hand or by posting a question in the question box. Both are in the right-hand panel. So I'll just give a few seconds in case there's any burning questions or points for discussion. Okay, then I think on that note, we will close the 6th webinar in the series. And I'll just close by saying again, we're so grateful for everyone who's joined us today, be it in the morning or afternoon session. We encourage you to constantly keep engaging and to keep checking out the engagement platform. We're constantly updating that with new events and new webinars, and please join us for the 7th webinar, the details of which are on the engagement platform as well. And all of these resources and links will be sent to you with the webinar recording for those who have registered. So thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.